This time around, we're going to be looking at Scanners, the once legendary 1981 movie written and directed by David Cronenberg. This used to be fairly notorious and very famous throughout the 80s, certainly.
I think mostly for one scene though, right? Not as like a piece of work for a moment.
I think, honestly, it was actually perceived as more than just that, and it did figure quite large in David Cronenberg's sort of filmography for a while until obviously, as he accumulated more and varied films, this kind of faded into the background. And part of the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I do think it's actually, still very watchable and very interesting, and it does tend to get sidelined. Even in, Cronenberg on Cronenberg, it still only merits like 10 pages or
Oh,
something.
really? Okay. Because it feels like it's a real turning point in terms of his career. He goes from pretty low budget work into, he had like financial success of this, and this is his kind of springboard into
Hollywood, really, yeah.
yeah, the Hollywood level. I mean, he has he ever worked in Hollywood? I think he's never actually shot in the States, has he?
Don't think so, no. He's made
I
films.
think there's a little bit of Map to the Stars was the first time he'd ever shot in the States.
Yeah.
Everything else is Canada, UK, and Austria, I think, for a Dangerous Method.
Yeah, this is the first big breakthrough hit. He'd had a really well regarded sleeper minor hit with The Brood, which is his first sort of mature film in '79. But then this one, it was a very slow week apparently, but it was number one in Variety's films that week, one week.
Okay.
When it was released, so suddenly everyone knew his name and
Yeah,
was
sure.
paying attention.
He talks. There's a little interview with him on the Criterion edition where he talks about his work being more recognised in the UK than it was in the US and Canada at the time. Do you know much about that?
Only from what I remember, he definitely was covered in movie magazines. You used to see and then occasionally buy Starburst and stuff like that, and they started covering horror movies. And I guess, as his films had recurring themes that would brand him as kind of like a nascent horror auteur.
The Baron of Blood.
The Baron of Blood.
That's one of his nicknames. That's pretty Apollo Creed, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess, other kind of more highbrow magazines would start taking note, I can see. And I wanted to talk about it because, for me, it's one of those ones I'd put on a list of how to make a B-movie or how to make a memorable B-movie. And we'll talk about, the pluses and minuses in a bit, but, it's I've got this kind of paragraph note. It's like if you know what effect you want to achieve, even if you're hampered with the basic writing, and even if it's your own very basic writing, and the performances, and perhaps the practical effects, if you can control everything else, like the art direction and the tone and the music, and make all that focus, then that'll balance it out. Yeah, another example I'd give for that would be, the Terminator.
Oh yeah, okay.
It has a limited central performance, shall we say, and it's a very basic story, and it has James Cameron's kind of clunky dialogue, but he's so in control of every other aspect of the filmmaking.
Vision, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I think that's true of Scanners as well. Against all odds, it still is a very, very sort of... I hesitate to say this because it is quite a rickety movie in places, but it does feel as controlled as any of Cronenberg's other kind of more highbrow films.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've kind of sat down and watched it in a long time, and I'd say I'm pretty certain I saw the exploding head scene on a VHS when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
I never really saw the rest of the film. I think the cover was pretty terrifying on the VHS. It was the
Michael Ironside
like
with his head
kind of
thrown
rigid,
back.
yeah, that's it. And like his body looks like it's warping from the inside out. It was just really terrifying. But I'm pretty sure I rented it at like 14 or 15. Sat down and found it like really boring and just couldn't connect to it at all. And then when you suggested it, I think I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. But the first viewing, I had the same reaction. I was watching it going, this is really boring. There's so much wrong with it. I was cursing you. I didn't even make any notes. And then I kind of switched it off, went to bed. And then like the next day, what I found was that loads of the ideas that are in the film and loads of sequences and technique kept coming back to me. And the second time I sat down to watch it again to take notes, I found myself kind of looking around, especially the central performance, which is something we are going to have to talk about.
Yeah.
But looking around that and looking at the themes and the ideas and, some of the visuals, and I don't know. I started forgiving like some of the terrible plotting as well, and there's so much in it that's like wrong, and yet somehow it's reaching so far, and its tone is like really measured, and I don't know. But by the end of the second, and then skimming through it again to make more notes, I don't know. I feel like I'm a convert. I feel like in about 6 months, I'm probably going to watch it again. An open heart and kind of look around the bits that don't work and let it go, man.
Mm.
Because there was so much in it that I was just really blown away by. I'm not quite sure where we should start, but
I mean,
no,
I'm not going to go into great detail about how. So I was aware of it in the same way that I was aware of a lot of like adult and horror films when I was a kid, in that they were in magazines. And then when I got a chance a few years later to rent it on video, rented it and watched it then. I think it's probably my first Cronenberg. I think after that, then I
what are your
was.
feelings on Cronenberg? Because I'm a little bit. I wouldn't say it's kind of overrated, but I'd say it's very hit and miss.
I have to sort of fall back on like the music analogy, where I really like his early stuff, and then a lot of his mature stuff, but I do find I'm less and less interested in his more recent films. Yeah, I think everything from The Brood right through till, see, Dead Ringers is great. I think there's I never ever have liked Naked Lunch, and I think a lot of his films post Naked Lunch I don't really have a great deal of time for.
Like History of Violence and Eastern
Yeah,
Promises, those sort.
those two particularly, especially since they were such hits, if you
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
I find people are kind of overlooking some really, really blatant flaws and problems in them.
Well, that's what I've just said about Scanners.
Yeah. I have to quote Kim Newman, who says quite accurately for me that Cronenberg's original ideas are far more interesting than the works that he tends to adapt. He does a lot of literary adaptations now,
Oh, sure.
and yeah, I find he makes those films very, very well. They're still beautifully made, very, very polished, and often quite interesting, but they're not as interesting as his own films. That whole run, even including what he brought to the Dead Zone and The Fly. Fly for me is a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'll be talking about The Fly more because I think it sits as a perfect partner to Scanners.
Hmm.
They do a lot of the same things. I just don't think that his mature works based on other people's ideas are all that interesting.
Yeah, okay.
What are your feelings on Cronenberg overall? I mean, I'm saying what I said because I was very, very close to his films, and I remember when The Fly came out, and it was like a victory lap for all of us who'd been following
Sure,
and
yeah.
knew that he was capable of doing these things and had seen the seeds of this in all his other movies.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of nice moment in his career, isn't it?
Mm.
A good actor to really breathe life into a character as well. And I think that in the later work, when he has Viggo Mortensen to play with,
I think he's been quite lucky from Videodrome onwards. James Woods in Videodrome, who nails it,
Yeah, true, true.
and Christopher Walken in The
I've
Dead
always
Zone.
I've always found Videodrome to be like trying too hard, and never sort of really got on with it.
Videodrome was a very sort of shambolic, hesitant production as well. I think partly because it was a very loose and over-ambitious script, but with them being quite similar productions, why do you think Videodrome doesn't work quite as well?
The beauty of Scanners is it's very simple conceit of ESP in this universe. It does exist, and it's contained in this local area because of one person, affecting all the pregnant women in the area,
Yeah.
creating scanner children, and then it's just really a contained world, and it's all about the conflict between two sets of scanners that's reduced essentially down to a sort of Cain and Abel story. And it feels like his mind was in the right place to deal with that kind of short notice production, and for him just to keep like just bringing ideas out and putting them on screen. It felt like he was probably, highly trained athlete at that point. He could have just turned up with no script and winged it, and
Mm.
come out with something pretty interesting. I think Videodrome feels like somebody's got a bunch of ideas and some money, and they're kind of messing around, and it's not very coherent.
Self-indulgent then.
Yeah, like I said before, it feels like it's trying to be crazy and outlandish and disgusting and challenge you intellectually and challenge you as an audience member to keep your popcorn in your stomach. It's trying to. I just think it's trying to do too much, and it doesn't feel very sincere. Whereas Scanners feels like it's somebody telling a story they genuinely believe in. And I think you do feel that watching Scanners. There's a couple of choices visually. It's just really amazing moments of like layering faces over each other to
Yeah.
show that there's some scanning control going on, and also there's a few really nice tracking shots.
Yeah.
There's so many little wow moments that it feels like it has the energy of something that's being improvised, or a student that's steeped in film technique, given carte blanche. It just, I don't know, there's something really kind of mesmerizing about, if it was as chaotic as they say. I think you get some of that energy
Mm.
back, which is, I think is important because the central performance is another one of those sort of, it hobbles the film. I feel bad saying it because there's an interview with Stephen Lack on.
He's such a great guy,
He
isn't
seems
he?
like such a really decent, interesting character, and he's had
Yeah.
a whole, like, didn't really make much of his acting career and went off to be a visual artist and had a whole career doing that. And it feels like he wasn't that into acting and the acting business and show business.
Yeah.
And there's another interview with him online, which I'll dig out and link to, and he just seems like such a really nice, charming bloke. So I feel a bit bad,
But it's
putting some heat on his performance.
yeah, it's odd that he's so like again on camera being interviewed as himself. He's so relaxed and open and everything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the performance is so clenched and awkward, isn't it?
Yeah, and like he's like beautiful on camera as well.
Yeah.
The first 3 or 4 minutes before he says anything, you get his like chiseled looks, but there's like beautiful eyes and some kind of depth to that. And then when he starts speaking, he's like, "How about this, mate?" It's like just as, and the Canadian accents really throw me as well. That's very strange, isn't it? You don't see that in films anymore.
I don't
People
know.
having Canadian accents.
I've not noticed it as a Canadian accent,
How about that? It's
but
like
I
that.
don't hear it as that. I just hear it as like a generic North American accent. I might be making too much of how hurried a production it was, as if it was something that just had to be dreamt up to be shot in 2 weeks' time. It was a script that he'd had hanging around since the early 70s, which he called Telepathy 2000, and later it was retitled The Sensitives. Suddenly, this script kind of comes into shape, and it kind of comes together pretty well on the fly.
Yeah, I think so.
He does say it was a very kind of scrappy production, and that a lot of it was rejigged and saved in post-production. The interview in Cronenberg on Cronenberg, he says that's the most technique in post-production he's ever used of splicing lines from here and there and rejigging things around.
Sure.
And then
Was it greenlit quickly for the Canadian tax credit?
exactly, it
So
had
they
to
had
be
to spend the money by a year's end.
yeah, and it was coming up to the end of the year, so they had to go into production and get principal photography done by the end of the year. Otherwise, the investment isn't really a write-off anymore. Which kind of explains why there were so many bits and pieces of reshoots and why they were able to come back and do, the whole scanner duel as a complete reshoot later the following year. But yeah, I agree. You kind of get the feeling that this idea has been kind of percolating in his head, and now he's just suddenly got the chance to write a really good first draft on the fly, bang.
Yeah, that's it.
Like
And
writing it on
but
film.
with 3, 4 films experience, meaning that he can improvise and find solutions on the fly
Yeah.
and come up with like really interesting.
And it's
results.
perfect timing as well, because he'd just come off the back of his non-horror movie Fast Company, which was an action movie about racing
Have
cars.
you ever seen that?
Not completist in that way, no. That was the first movie where his creative team came together. Kind of had his DOP and his editor and his art director and possibly Howard Shore as composer on that movie. So he's got his team around him now. This is the first time we've actually kind of sat down and discussed it since we set ourselves the assignment of doing this. It's quite gratifying to hear that you warmed to the ideas in it, because for me, one of the things that makes this such a standout amongst other kind of similar low budget horror movies of the time, and as a solid Cronenberg film, is that it takes the basic idea, which would be enough for a lot of filmmakers, which is kind of telepaths at war, but it teases out every kind of disturbing aspect and tangent of it.
Yeah, it looks at it, it takes it like totally seriously, and then imagines what are the kind of byproducts of a world with telepaths in it. There's an oft quoted scene where one of the characters gets scanned by an unborn baby.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff. As you're watching, you're like, oh shit,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
really creepy and really cool, and the strength of the telepath obviously relates to how broad their abilities are, you know,
Mm.
and seeing them take control of other people and use it as a weapon, as mind control. You know, there's lots of permutations on it, which I
Mm.
just thought was really kind of rounded exploration of it as a theme, as an idea.
And there's all the other sort of subsidiary things as well, like when Kim Obrist's group kind of scan together as a group
Yeah,
mind.
that's right. Yeah, that's a really nice.
It's a real kind of disturbing idea, you know, of losing yourself in a group mind and becoming one mind. And then,
Yeah, yeah, but they're oblivious to the intruders that are in
well,
the room as
that's
well.
that's watching it, you know, watching it a second, third time around. There's kind of like, I don't know, would you call it plot holes or inconsistencies where you would think like a group mind would be super aware, and perhaps it might be, you know, more useful if they're in different parts of the building.
Well, yeah, I mean, then you get, you know, it's one of those films you sort of don't want to get too much into.
Nuts and bolts.
Yeah, putting a microscope on some of the logic because then it, like, you know, it
It
all
does.
goes up in flames, you know, and especially like the actual storytelling, the plotting, and the connections between the characters, the two brothers, their father, and the company that he owned and the company that he works for. Once you start putting a microscope on that stuff as well, it's like, oh my god, that's really soapy and it doesn't even make much sense. So, you know, there are moments in it when you're looking at it, especially I think the first time, if you're going in judgmental, where, yeah, yes, these guys are doing a group scan, so their minds are connected, and you would expect the radius of that scan to really be hypersensitive to other individuals that are under some kind of telepathic control entering the room
Mm,
in which they're doing their group session. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Mm.
But if we skip past that, then immediately off the back of that, you have, you know, a number of them are gunned down. And there's another idea as well. If you're part of a group mind and you survive that, you know what it's like to experience death.
Yeah, see, that's what it's waiting
That's
for, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, and later stuff as well. You know, you've got scanning a computer.
Yeah, I like that. There was one of the scenes that really comes quite later on, but one of the scenes that I was just like, okay, yeah, there's something here. There's definitely something here. Was when Kim scans one of the security guards in the facility towards the end,
Yeah,
and he just sees his mother.
yeah,
He's looking back at his own mother, and he's like apologizing, and it's just done in a cut. Like there's no sort of fancy gimmickry. It's purely done in a well thought out, well edited sequence,
mm.
and I was just like, okay, hats off. That's really nicely crafted. Very simple, very effective.
And then yeah, as you say, the unborn baby scan. I remember being extremely freaked out.
Yeah, yeah,
I get freaked out by fetus imagery and ideas
yeah,
of
yeah.
unborn children. So the idea of being scanned by an unborn child is
Mm-mm.
really quite chilling. And then obviously, you know, the gruesome fight to the death by scanning powers, and then even at the end of the film, there's a final stinger of kind of like psychic transference and
Yeah, that's right.
amalgamation into a single body.
Yeah,
It's
that's it.
it's really strange,
It's really good. You know,
ambiguous ending.
all of those moments are what kind of elevate it, I think.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
what it does have is kind of concrete boots on at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, which all the things that should be great, some of the performances, some of the writing, you know, some of the set pieces, you know, some of it just is terrible. I think it does get away with it. I mean, let's talk about the film, not kind of scene by scene, but in like a general overview of what we see and
Yeah.
how the threads are connected. I mean, again, we don't want to look too closely, but I mean, there's some really lovely scenes, and like for me, I'm a bit of a fan of, you know, the interiors of the
Yeah.
1970s, and the opening sequence in a shopping mall. It's really beautiful, like really deep red colors. You have those light bulbs suspended from the ceiling that have they're coated in like a half moon reflected surface. All those thoughts and designs of the 1970s finally made their way into mainstream architecture
Mm.
and interior design for shopping malls and office buildings, and you know, the interiors. I just think they're so lush. You know, I'm taking kind of style notes while I'm watching it. I like the way the film looks.
It is a particular at this stage. I think it is quite a fashionable looking film. I'll flag it up later on. But there's a lot of kind of establishing shots of industrial buildings
Yeah,
with a like low winter sun and that
yeah,
kind of,
yeah, yeah.
it's
That's right.
just, this is really, on trend for.
Yeah, yeah, and but in that, that period before, when the population of the planet was half of what it is now, and you could build an industrial building, and for it to be the only thing
Mm,
in that area apart from like a really flat car park, they're not kind of butted up against each other in
mm.
these dense kind of forests of skyscrapers that we're kind of used to now. And I'm sure even Canada looks, where is it, Ontario that they were shooting?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's much more built up now,
Yeah.
40 years later.
Again, this is I guess Carol Spear and her team.
Hmm.
Like all these are really nicely chosen locations and
Yeah,
interiors, and right down to some of the exterior establishing shots. It's these are the ways that you kind of you build your film when you haven't got the kind of solid budgetary foundation that you'd have for a big film. You just put your ideas into and make your choices count.
yeah. Find spaces that are the perfect backdrop for this story.
Mm. I do quite like. There's a little bit in this opening scene in the shopping mall where Vale, on instinct, kind of scans a middle-aged woman who's making fun of him.
Yeah, it's like a spiteful scan, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's this odd kind of weird early Cronenberg sexual kink to it where she kind of falls to the floor in a fit and her skirt kind of rides up,
Yeah,
and it's that kind of uncomfortable
she's
thing.
quite an old lady, isn't she?
Or sort of, yeah, like late middle aged, and you're thinking you don't even want to admit to yourself that you're feeling uncomfortable
Yeah.
about seeing this. It's
Mm.
that kind of can't quite put your finger on it.
Mm.
Weird sexual
Yeah,
discomfort.
yeah. He's always been slightly pervy, hasn't he? I think that's.
And yeah, and there's another bit in it as well. I'm going to talk about how this is a lot like The Fly, but throughout.
Hmm.
But there's the bit I remember watching it with my friend on video for the first time. We both winced really badly when he gets a dart in his hand.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just that kind of close up of personal injury that Cronenberg was quite good at.
Mm.
Still does it to this day as well. I think there's a bit in the History of Violence after the attack in the cafeteria where you just kind of get this gloating close up of somebody's ruined face.
Yeah, sure.
I remember like the dart in the hand being particularly potent, and I would compare that with a snapped wrist third of the way through The Fly
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's
sure.
a sudden physical injury like really, really hits you hard.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the first act is pretty much the strongest in this movie. I think when things get going and the train starts, really pulling out of the station, it does start to get a bit rickety, as action scenes come and go and stuff. But I think the setup is really, really strong, and the filmmaking's really, really carefully constructed.
At the shopping mall, he's apprehended by two agents and taken.
Two agents in spy trench
Proper
coats.
spy. Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's FBI 70s trench coats, really inconspicuous. How do they know to be there? Have they had a tip off or something? Is that, or
I
it's not
think
just a
so, yeah.
coincidence?
Well, I mean, it's suggested later in the film that Ruth's had.
He's been zeroing in.
He's
on
been zeroing in
Cameron
on
Vale.
Cameron. Well, he's known where he is and let him live like that, and was just keeping him.
I mean,
as
shall
like
we just like quickly flag up the one of the script's main conceits, which is that Dr. Ruth is the architect of all of the telepathic characters, all the scanners in the film, and he's also the father of the antagonist and the protagonist.
Yeah.
That's. I haven't misunderstood that.
No, that's absolutely it.
So, are we to believe that he's been monitoring his son and keeping him within like
Well, I think
arm's reach?
I think the initial suggestion, I think what you're supposed to think is that Consec have been looking out for scanners, and they've noticed Vale, and this time they've seen him scan someone and apprehended him. It's only revealed later on from Daryl Revock that it's possible that Ruth had known that Vale was a scanner all along and had been keeping tabs on him and letting him live like that until he felt like he wanted to bring him in. It's kind of, this is one of the weird things in the script where it doesn't quite work, that it suggests that Dr. Ruth is quite Machiavellian and quite cold and callous, but it doesn't quite translate because Patrick McGowan's performance is actually quite warm and tender.
Yeah, he's good at bringing like complex depth
Yeah,
to something that's quite hammy.
yeah. And it's weird. The movie was originally supposed to open with the next scene, the exploding head scene.
Yeah, and into Revock's escape.
But then immediately after that, there's a meeting where Dr. Ruth explains to the board and that extremely genial pipe smoking
Yeah.
chairman of the board,
Yeah.
who's far too
But
pleasant a
that's,
man.
as a sidebar, that's a beautiful boardroom, isn't it? With that brushed steel table.
Yeah, and the red carpet
It looks
tiles.
so lovely. Yeah, it's really nice.
But it's
Oh, so that all the way up to there was the opening.
well, if you assume that the meeting would follow on immediately afterwards
I mean, he
in the
says,
structure, and he says then, "Oh, I've got someone up my sleeve. I've got someone I've been keeping an eye on."
and
And if
then
you
you would
then
cut
cut
to
to Cameron,
coming through the door in the shopping mall.
yeah, as a derelict, then that is the suggestion. If that was the original structure, then yes, Dr. Ruth has known about him for a long time and has just let him live like this, which is more callous. But as it's structured now, you would only really get that if you were told it by Revok at the end of the movie. So it's a little bit confused.
I read everywhere that Cronenberg switched those scenes so that latecomers to the film wouldn't miss the big moment. But
I'd read that it just hit people too hard, and they never quite recovered from it for the to be able to take in the rest of the
oh, okay, but well,
setup.
in the interview that he does on the Criterion edition, he actually talks about there being a structural issue that the film just kind of the brakes slam on halfway through the first act once you kind of introduce Cameron Vale and the film slows right down, and he said he lost loads of people, so that was why he made the switch. But
Oh, that makes sense.
I think maybe to be kind to his lead actor, he's kind of gone with the so latecomers don't miss the big moment.
So yeah, I mean, without going into too much detail, really liked the first scene with Dr. Ruth and Vale. I think it's a beautiful example of how to explain things gracefully to an audience and still have a visceral effect. Basically, the scene is that Vale is strapped to the bed. Ruth orders in a whole bunch of people, 20 or 30 people,
Yeah.
who sit on chairs. Absolutely, they mutter as they come in, but they're instructed to sit silently. And you start to hear their thoughts building up and overlapping through what I think is remarkably imaginative sound design, which you get a lot of throughout
Yeah,
this
it's really
film.
nicely layered, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hurry up. Hurry up.
And then you get a cutaway to, again, the exterior of the building, which is another of those Cronenberg strange warehouse spaces. It looks a lot like Seth Brundle's warehouse
Yeah, sure.
warehouse apartment loft in The Fly. And then you come back to the scene, and the voices are just kind of doing this horrible, fluctuating, fluttering, distorted effect.
Cameron Vale is freaking out at this point.
Yeah,
as
twitching
best-
and
as best
sweating
he's
and
able to.
And then Ruth gives Vale a shot of ephemeral, the drug which creates his scanning powers in the womb, and which is the only thing that can calm them down. And within one strange and effective scene, the audience has been told the whole kind of setup of his psychic
Yeah,
powers.
you get it, don't you?
Yeah. Talk a bit more about Patrick McGowan in this, but I think he nails the character within that one scene, doesn't he?
Yeah, one presented version of the character, which I think as the film progresses and we get all this kind of extra backstory from Revok about them being related and stuff, I think that kind of undermines what we've seen before, and I wonder if that wasn't just tagged on for the reshoot.
Well, my note is as well when I first first rewatched it, it felt a bit Empire Strikes Back.
Mm.
It felt like that was what you had to do. You had to tie these characters together in some
Wasn't
familiar
Cronenberg
way.
up for directing Empire Strikes Back for a while?
No, he was up for Return of the Jedi. And off the back of that, he goes straight into the most kind of legendary, notorious scene in the film. I mean, it's the scene that everyone's seen, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's the exploding head.
but I mean, it is a great piece of cinema.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, and not just. I think like Louis Del Grande, the actor who plays the scanner,
Victim.
Yeah, well, he's a scanner himself, isn't he? And he's very sort of cocksure and corporate, and he's got a really good face and a really good presence. He's really commanding, and he's sat in a really beautiful 1970s auditorium.
Amphitheatre, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a university campus or something.
All of the consec interiors have this wonderful kind of raw concrete
And red
carpet. Yeah,
it's nice. It's a nice balance. And I think they're all kind of military personnel that are there to see a demonstration of scanning abilities.
I think there's a bit of sort of corporate presence as well.
And he's calling out for a volunteer, isn't he, to kind of read their mind and demonstrate his abilities. And Michael Ironside stands up, walks to the front, sits down next to him, and then you get this. It's quite nice because it is still a question. You don't really understand what's going on.
Mm.
But yeah, they have a kind of scanning duel where.
Well, it's not even a duel. It's kind of.
Well, I think
One's fighting for his life, and the other one's just pushing through his defences remorselessly.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it goes one way, doesn't it? I think
Yeah.
he lets him in a little bit, and I think maybe once he sees the force of the power he's about to face down, yeah, it's really good, and I think it's definitely worth like flagging up Michael Ironside from this point on. He kind of. He is so commanding on screen, and he does there's something, wonderfully sexual and dangerous about it when he scans. Other people, they just sort of they do a bit of a Professor X where they're kind of holding their temple and focusing and concentrating, and he's kind of pouting and licking his lips and groaning and grunting. It's very kind of like terrifying and. Like really focused his eyes.
Yeah, it's really kind of penetrative, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. It really feels like he's violating everybody that he kind of touches.
Mm.
I think one of the early drafts, or maybe even the Burroughs short story that was a reference for Cronenberg, I think involved somebody doing a psychic rape on a train.
Mm.
Did you read that?
No.
So, I think that's probably what piqued Cronenberg's, pervy intuition early on. Mm. And I think that's what you definitely get from Ironside's performance. It's really sexual.
He's remarkable in it, isn't he? It's odd. You can still watch this, under the shadow of his. Regrettably, a lot of his stuff since has been direct to video.
Yeah, but he had a brilliant kind of moment, didn't he? From this, he went to the first thing I ever saw him in was V. Do you remember that when he had like a leather jacket, looked really cool. He had like two Uzis, one in each hand, and he definitely. I remember seeing it when I was at school, and like everybody wanted to be his character. Nobody wanted to be like the Mark Singer character. Mm. And I think the next thing I saw him in was Extreme Prejudice. Have you seen that? The Walter Hill, Wild Bunch kind of remake. He's really good in that, commanding his military unit. Top Gun, Highlander 2, Starship Troopers.
Yeah, but there's also there's a lot of kind of direct-to-video stuff. I mean, he's got peaks later on, but
Total Recall. We haven't talked about Total Recall.
But I've always thought of him as like, he's a terrific actor, but when you fall into that sort of direct-to-video thing, you're Amanda Sante, you're Rutger Hauer, as good as you are, you're kind of tainted a bit by the material.
Sure.
So when I see him in Starship Troopers...
take the money, yeah.
Yeah, when I see him in Starship Troopers, I think, okay. I mean, he's great in it.
Yeah.
But you think, okay, that's brave casting, that's good. But it's possible to see him in this and just see he just outshines all of that.
Yeah, he's really good, isn't he? He's
incredible.
On fire. It's such a great performance. It's all the cliches. It's nuanced. It's textured. You see all the different layers.
It's got physicality as well. And Cronenberg really knows how to shoot him, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
There's the scene where he's waiting outside Kim's commune house.
But he's controlling those other gunmen that he's sending in. So, yeah. And you're going to talk about that long tracking shot.
The long sort of low angle tracking shot under him.
So good, isn't it?
Yeah, he's dynamite in this.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good. It's one of those. If maybe he'd have gone in a different direction. He could have, had a really nice kind of character career.
Yeah, he could even have been a Nicholson, couldn't he? I
Well,
think.
it's a hairline thing. I was thinking about comparing him to Nicholson because of the hairline. But...
So I guess if we're talking about Michael Ironside and we're going to talk about Patrick McGoohan very shortly, should we talk about Stephen Lack?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned briefly how genuinely decent he comes across in the interviews, and he seems like a smart, talented, creative guy. But I think he has a very kind of low ceiling, a low range as an actor.
I find there's moments in this when he's kind of okay, and I think a lot of that is because he's propped up in scenes with good people. It's almost comical, the scene that comes up later on where he goes to visit Benjamin Pierce in his artist studio, and you've effectively got two fairly non-professional actors, and it's almost impossible to know where to land in that scene because it's like a competition.
Saying words at each other, aren't they? It's very, very surreal. But it's such a beautiful scene. Again, this is one of the sort of frustrating realities of this film, is that in a beautiful scene like that, you have two terrible actors who are really
just
not able to
deliver lines in a
to get the point
way
across or anything. But somehow, like the scene is another great set piece in the film. It's very confusing. Yeah, I mean, we could just sit here and go like, "Oh, Stephen, like he's not very good in this film."
Well, I liked him. I liked him physically, and Cronenberg did cast him because of how he looks.
Yeah, definitely. I wish he'd had less dialogue. I wish he'd been mute and he had like a talking monkey as like his sidekick, that kind of cigar smoking talking monkey who just kind of gives you all the rest of the information. Yeah. Sorry.
That's flawed me, but but there's like when you're looking at the way he delivers lines, even when he's delivering lines, I was looking at him and think, okay, well, obviously his eyes are unusual, but then there's like very, very attractive things about him on screen. Like he's got a mouth which is sort of like Ben Mendelsohn's. I was noticing that sort of very strange delivery, very strange physical delivery of words. And he's kind of quite compelling to look at, but it's just the inability to make words sound convincing just flaws it. There's a phone call later on where he kind of phones up Dr. Ruth. I think it's where Dr. Ruth is relaxing in his club, and it's just like the sign off at the end of that, something like "Thank you, I'll speak to you soon, Dr. Ruth," and it's so clunkingly unrealistic. And you think,
there's a scene earlier on when we first meet Kim Obrist. There's a scene in an art gallery where Stephen he just looks at the camera. It's like a sideways glance just to see where he is in relation to the camera that's tracking right to left. It's like very strange, and Cronenberg was only giving him one or two takes and then just moving on. I think he knew what he was dealing with.
I mean, there's an argument that if you cast a non-professional and they give you a non-professional performance, it can often give your movie a bit of flavour. It can make it seem...
Not this, I think, and that's the problem where you have Ironside, who was, I don't know what stage his career was at this point, but, I think he's pretty much local theatre, and he just is on fire.
Yeah.
And I think Stephen Lack.
Let's not play on that.
Yeah, no.
But I know what you mean.
Yeah,
it's just.
I just don't think he had the right kind of energy, and it doesn't work as a counterpoint. It's just flat.
But it does kind of work. I mean,
it's not even otherworldly. When you see like David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth, and he doesn't really do or say that much, but he has just this kind of aura about him that's kind of convincing and otherworldly and compelling. This, I think, initially you start off drawn to his looks, and then you start stepping back further and further, and it doesn't reward your patience. A couple of times early on in the film, we see ephemeral, the drug that was instrumental in creating the scanners, and as I understand it, is part of being able to suppress their abilities. Is it like a complete blanket suppression? Because with Revok, after he's exploded the head, they try and use it to shut him down.
Well, this is where it all gets a bit sketchy. If you if you start to examine the details too closely, I
never quite understood it, because it seemed that with Cameron Vale, he says, "Oh, it stops the voices," but then he suddenly has full control over his abilities.
It allows him to focus.
But then, how are they going to use it to stop Revok from creating chaos?
I don't really know,
because if it's
a blanket suppressor,
fine, but it doesn't seem like it is.
No, well, I think it's just an inconsistency we'll have to live with.
We get a nice sequence later on with Cameron Vale. He's being trained as a spy. There's a really weird scene where he goes to meet an ancient yoga guru.
Yes.
Who is this old man who looks like he's never sat on the floor before. He looks really old and stiff, doesn't he? He doesn't look like a yoga guru at all.
Well, I get it's quite a powerful scene in terms
It's a
of
good
tension.
scene,
Yeah.
because we see that Cameron actually has quite a lot of power in his abilities.
And I'm wondering if obviously we know the story back to front, but I wonder if it's being sort of set up that scanning people might tend towards evil, and there's a possibility because it's a fairly sadistic the way that he keeps the guy's heartbeat accelerating
Yeah.
beyond the point where he's told to stop. You might kill him. And then just kind of lets him go and kind of quite smugly says, "You're right, Dr. Ruth, it was easy."
And
so I wonder if they're teasing him up as being, his powers making him morally ambiguous, that he might join the underground and...
Yeah, sure, maybe. And there's the flashback with Revok, which I really liked.
Yes.
And that was the only scene he was supposed to be in, right, Michael Ironside?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he that's all he was signed up for, was to be a patient in a flashback.
Yeah.
Archive footage.
Archive footage.
And I think from there they were like, oh, okay, this is what we need. And so then his role was written large. Yeah, he's really good in that. He looks really young as well compared to how we see him in the film. It's a really sort of convincing younger version of himself. Apart from that, there's a really long dramatic pause where he turns to the wall to throw a glass and then springs around with it.
I thought that was quite unnerving as well. There's a little bit of corporate stuff where Keller, the Consec goon, meets up with a mystery man who I was quite surprised watching this back that it was revealed so much later that it was Revok, because it's so fucking obvious that it's Revok.
That was such a weird choice, that one. What a beautiful station that is, right?
Yeah.
That's Yorkdale Station in Toronto. You know, when you just see a space and you're just like, that's such a beautiful train station there. Like, again, the steel escalators, the curved glass wall at the top of the escalators, the lovely concrete. I paused the film, did a little bit of research on the architect. I was pleasantly surprised. Yeah.
So we're now into Act 2. I broke the film into 2 acts.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The first one was all that establishing stuff, which I think works so well. The second one I've titled Vale's Quest, which sounds like a role-playing game.
Yeah.
This is where he's going out into the world to find Kim Obrist's group and see if he can find his way to Revok.
He's been tasked by his father to hunt his brother. It's not that at that stage. He's been tasked by Ruth to find Revok. So you get the scene that you've mentioned earlier in the Crossdig Gallery, which is a good Cronenberg name, with the comic camp homosexual gallery owner. But he does get to meet Kim Obrist there, played by Jennifer O'Neill. Who has top billing in the film.
Yeah, I mean, she's clearly... I'm quite surprised. She's clearly the biggest star. Apparently was unhappy working on the film because her agents had sent her a script without any of the violence in. But then when she turned up, it wasn't the sort of thing she was into.
It's strange because, referring back to the kind of big reveal at the end, the 2 most powerful scanners that are actually brothers, her scanning ability is really strong. She's able to set people on fire with her mind, when they attack this circle we talked about before.
Yeah.
She's got a really kind of strong psychic ability, strong telepathic ability, and she's clearly older than those guys. So,
well, here's the thing: she's 32.
The character.
Well, I don't know about the character, but the Jennifer O'Neill. I was surprised when I looked.
At the time, she's 32.
Yeah,
she looks about 55.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's the grey hair makes her look significantly older.
And the sort of little surgical tweaks.
But she was 32.
Shut up.
No, really. It's a bit of a non-character, isn't it, Kim Obrist? She's basically there to be tortured. But then I think Jennifer O'Neill does that pretty well. She does sort of suggest someone who's traumatised by the way that she perceives the world. And you get
I think the idea is that it's supposed to be a team-up, isn't it, at the end? So Cameron Vale has his mission and he teams up with her, and by knowing her and her group, he sees Yeah, she has a really wonderful line, one of the best lines in it, where they're talking about Revok, and she says, "Look, we're the dream, and he's the nightmare." You know, this idea of what scanning could be to the human race. I think she's supposed to guide him towards finding his own destiny.
Yeah, I thought just the fact that because she also says that he's barely a human being, and I think the fact that they spend time together makes him more compassionate and more human. But I do think that Kim Obrist and all of the other scanners in that kind of apartment building all do seem to be like recovering addicts in personality. They do
Sure.
seem to be quite damaged, and they have difficulty with the world, and they kind of show signs of that. And I do think O'Neill's performances does kind of touch on that quite well.
Yeah, yeah. So Vale scans the gallery owner, doesn't he, to get the information?
Yes, and then finds where Benjamin Pierce, the artist, works. It's worth flagging up the gallery scene for the weird, bizarre, cartoony scanner art, isn't it? The strange sculptures.
Yeah.
Which
A very GCSE, apart from the very last one. Which
that's
is,
what I was
is quite
thinking.
striking.
I was thinking. I'm wondering if they didn't kind of see if any of the kind of like sculptors or art designers had some stuff that they wanted to get into a movie, and then rather than have something designed specially. But then when you get to Pierce's barn, the works that he has there are really striking.
Oh yeah, it's that giant head, like
Yeah.
just on its side, in the and he's turned it into like a little cubby hole.
Yeah, but he's also fleshed it out with these kind of like flesh-coloured fabrics inside, so it's really strange prop.
Yeah, it's really nice. Beautiful looking scene. The next scene with Vale and Pierce.
It's the setting in the countryside as well, kind of the winter countryside with the...
And almost, 10, 20 seconds into the scene, we get like the threat from the outside, that sort of nice Hitchcockian ticking bomb under the table as we see the gunman emptying out from a transit van and like starting to surround the building, and they're all kind of loaded up with shotguns ready to do damage. It's a really nice moment.
Yeah, I mean, how do you rate the action? I mean, in terms of like action filmmaking in the barn scene,
I really
it's
like it.
strong, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like it. It's kind of it's a bit peck and par. It's kind of like big shotgun. Basically the gunmen come in, kill Pierce, and then in a nice kind of volley of shotgun blasts. It's a shame that it's not more squibby. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of blood. And then there's a really nice sort of kickback from Vale as he kind of unleashes his power and kind of knocks everybody down. Doesn't kill them all, does he? Because we see a few of them later on.
No, I think he renders one completely useless because it doesn't turn up in any later scenes. Completely
fries their brains.
Yeah, absolutely fries his mind.
Yeah.
I think the other two sort of survive it a bit. Yeah, I think the action overall, because this is partly a sci-fi action B-movie thriller, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
all of those things. It's all of those.
Yeah, those like the car chase bit that follows.
There's a really nice one where the truck is just like going down the pavement and then swerves into traffic. I was like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean all that stuff, that kind of the nuts and bolts that you need, that stuff works, doesn't it?
It's effective, yeah, definitely. Yeah, this scene, considering how terrible the actors are in it, I really like it.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was saying before. It's like if you can do enough other stuff in a scene, you can control it in other ways. You can kind of work around those handicaps.
Yeah, sure.
And make the film work overall.
One thing I thought when Cameron Vale first walks into Benjamin Pierce's barn, and Benjamin Pierce does a little cackle, it sounds exactly like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker laugh. You know what it sounds like? It's identical.
No.
Listen to it now.
I do like Robert Silverman, the actor who plays Benjamin Pierce.
I mean, is he an actor?
He's not really, but he's been in quite a few Cronenberg movies.
Oh, yeah.
He had a better cameo in The Brood. Have you seen The Brood? Do you know the basic?
You know what? My stepdad put it on for him and a mate when I was about 11, and I think I came in at like the wrong point and just like saw 10 minutes of carnage, and I've never been able to go back to it since.
It's really good. He's got a great cameo in that as another patient of Oliver Reed's clinic whose treatment has not been that successful. But he's kind of like an annoying eccentric in the building, and he's playing opposite Art Hindle, who's quite a good actor. So it works a lot better.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he has a really good cameo in Existenz, but he's particularly effective in that because he's a virtual reality game character.
Right.
So he's not quite a human being. He just kind of has to respond to a couple of things, and they kind of uses. I think he'd understand if we said limitations. Very effectively.
Yeah, of course.
So Vale's now on a mission to meet Kim Obrist and her.
Why is he looking for them? How are they connected to Revok?
He's basically because they're all scanners, and Revok will have tried to either recruit them or kill them at some point. So it's just any kind of connection that'll lead into Revok. So there's these kind of like free floating.
It's like an underground, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's. I always think of it as just as a commune. They're none of them particularly well-adjusted people. They're all kind of finding solace together rather than.
Yeah, I think they're treating it as like a sort of spiritual phenomenon more than something to be weaponized.
So he goes to meet them and very quickly is welcomed into their group. I thought, considering he's quite a dangerous character and it's a dangerous world, I thought they'd.
Yeah, well, somebody scans him at the door, don't they? There's like a mental pat down to see if he's a danger, and I think they see that he's a good spirit, maybe.
So we've already kind of discussed the group mind thing, and then you get the action scene that we mentioned before.
Yeah,
the chase through the streets.
I really love that moment when we have that really long tracking shot into Michael Ironside, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But then there's a really nice montage of layered faces where we see that he's using his scanning abilities to control the two gunmen going into the building.
Yeah, and it's the only thing that would flag that for you, isn't it? It's just because otherwise you just think they were hired hands.
Well, it's like it's an army, a scanner army. He's got his side, they've got theirs, but no, it's like he's on his own basically, right?
Yeah. He's using them as puppets.
Yeah. And because he's not recruiting other scanners, he's wiping them out. He's wiping them all out, and then what he's doing is controlling the ephemeral and creating a new generation of baby scanners.
Yeah, which will then be his soldiers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there anything to talk about with the scene where Kim and Cameron are in the basement of the record shop, and that hunter with a shotgun tracks them down, follows them down the stairs, and then Cameron uses his abilities?
Well, my main takeaway from those scenes is they're fairly sort of perfunctory telepathic ability scenes. I mean, the one that you talked about before in the corridors with the guard who sees his mother is another thing. But my main takeaway from these is the sound design, which I want to talk about a bit more later on.
I just like that one where the guy's on his knees and we get his point of view looking up at them and they're looking down at him. I just felt like they were starting to embrace their power, and Cameron was starting to define himself in this world. He's stepping out of his shadow, his father's shadow.
Yeah, and the camera accentuates that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Just thought it was nice little moment. Jesus Christ, what is it called? Biocarbon amalgamate. We get Cameron Vale hacking a computer to find Project Ripe.
Well, this is where, if you start to think about it a bit, you think, so this is a guy who's been a derelict all his life, knows how to use a computer.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about like a laptop of today, we're talking about a clunky old...
Yeah. Where you have to write in code, basically.
Yeah, so he knows how to use a computer and access files. I just have to kind of go with that.
Let it go. Considering how nice all the other interiors look, the biocarbonate amalgamate scenes with those kind of paper hazmat suits, I think they're like...
Yeah, and it's also the choice to shoot it with that weird filter on the lens, which makes it look like, is this a shit TV movie or something? Yeah,
it looks very Doctor Who, doesn't it? With the cracked ice...
Dry ice.
Dry ice, that's it, yeah.
And then, so that for me is the end of Act 2. And Act 3 is the whole endgame thing. Cameron and Kim, they realise that they're in quite serious danger, so they decide to come into Consec, get picked up and helicoptered in.
That's my favourite. 1970s trope is characters arriving by helicopter and landing in a perimeter circle of people stood waiting for them to come in. That's, for me, that was a real high point.
That just ticks the box.
Yeah, that's definitely a really nice moment.
But it's a slightly confused and hackneyed few scenes coming up. There's the weird Keller Obrist interrogation, which he weirdly comes onto her at some point for no reason at all.
Yeah.
You feel like you wandered into a slightly clunkier script, and then slaps her at one point. It's just like, really? Is this slightly clunky stuff?
Yeah. But then when she uses her power, he's really good in that scene where he's like, his arm flies back, doesn't it?
But the highlight of the whole kind of concept thing for me is when Vale breaks away from Ruth and goes off on his own path, which triggers Ruth to go into a an amazing interior monologue.
Yeah.
And I'm sounding like I'm taking the piss when I'm saying this, but it's such an eccentric scene that it just works in its own
compelling,
way.
definitely. Yeah. You don't look away. You're just like, what's he doing? Who's he talking to?
This film
is he talking to me?
Yeah.
What's
we're going into this man's interior thoughts for the first time.
Yeah.
But no, it's really, it's just one of those little eccentricities that twists the movie a bit more. Should we talk about Patrick McGowan at this stage?
It's a funny inclusion. He was sort of never really a career actor, right? We've both seen him in The Prisoner.
No, he's solid, consistent, working all the time actor.
But never like an A-lister, was he?
No,
he was never leading man
Well,
material.
that's it. He carried on working and being a character actor and doing, character roles in quite a lot of familiar stuff. He didn't disappear off into like BBC TV Land or anything.
True.
Yeah, he kept on working and working. He was a very kind of tortured man as well, and quite difficult on set for this one. I think he never got a handle on the material, so was very angry most of the time and quite difficult to deal with. But I think like a George C. Scott, it does feed into the performance quite well for our benefit. He does seem like a genuinely kind of tortured character.
I mean, he's really compelling when he's on screen.
But I do find the fact that he's such a tortured, withdrawn soul that there's moments of kind of like warmth and empathy that surprise you. Like when he takes Cameron Vale's hand after he gives him his first shot of Ephemeral, and just is kind of like in that kind of companionship.
Yeah, right.
And then later on, when he's kind of semi-comatose in his club, and Cameron calls him up and he says, "Oh, I've missed you." So those little touches of humanity seem pleasing, doubly pleasing when they come from somebody like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So once they escape from Consec,
because the idea is that Cameron has discovered a computer program that has all of the names of the pregnant women that Revok is giving Ephemeral to, so that he can create a new generation of scanners under his control.
So Ruth suggests that, in another extremely evocative line, he says, scanning is just the linking of two nervous systems separated by space, and a computer has a nervous system as well. So you can scan a computer as easily as you can a human.
It's really well written, isn't it?
Really well.
Considering how clunky a lot of this stuff is, like that is so concise and credible.
And evocative as well.
Yeah.
So they pull up in this kind of chilly, wintry garage forecourt with a phone booth out of town. So you kind of get this weird kind of open space, exposed feeling.
Yeah. Because the last time we saw them, they were stood in a corridor, and now
and
they don't get any more of the escape at all. You just sort of cut forwards and they're out.
And he phones through from the phone booth to scan the Consec computer, and scans it to access the right program. I actually, with the exception of some of the dodgy kind of macro circuit board stuff.
Oh, that's dated badly, isn't it?
If I were doing a George Lucas, I would be replacing those shots.
Yeah, sure.
Because the rest of the scene plays really well.
It does, yeah. It still holds up. It's credible, and you get both the exterior stuff, which is getting more and more tense, and you feel him. He's holding the old telephone receiver, and it's starting to like steam, and kind of as he's pushing with his abilities. And then we cut inside the computer room, and they're like panicking about somebody having external access and trying to shut it down and put it into self-destruct. I think it's a nice sequence.
It feels very much like working with computers would have been at the time. That kind of
It's really slow, isn't it?
Yeah, now you have like perfect graphic user interfaces which show you everything that's going on. And if you were doing this in a movie, you'd have a graphic interface
it's kind
going.
Of speed of thought, isn't it, nowadays? But he's like, okay, I'm going to put it into auto destruct, and he's like, okay, you need to lift up that flap, and I'm going to switch this, and it's going to take about 3 or 4 minutes.
But the actor's called Murray Crutchley.
Oh, okay.
Who
is he? An actual actor? I thought he was just like a technician.
No, he
computer nerd.
He's got other credits under the name of Lee Murray, but I think his performance is one of the best in the film.
Yeah.
Honestly, he kind of nails that quiet confidence. I this is my job, and I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can answer your questions perfectly. But then he kind of gets that subtle comedy as well when he's at gunpoint. I really like that performance.
Yeah. It's nice. It sort of does build up to a nice kind of climax with everything exploding and the doors of the computer room getting blown off, and Kenner, who we haven't liked since the beginning. He's quite a good actor, that guy.
Yeah, Lawrence Dane.
Yeah, but he gets slammed and he's dead, and a few of the technicians as well, just for being
spectacular.
so clever. Yeah.
The kind of pyrotechnics at the garage forecourt as well. I think the image of the melting phone is fantastic.
It's really good. Yeah.
One of my favourite choices comes next, and it's one of those things that highlights how important, like, art design and world building are. Kim and Cameron pull up in suburbia, and they absolutely nail suburbia in every aspect. It's a beautiful tree-lined street.
Yeah, it's autumnal, isn't it? Yeah.
Autumnal, white houses, kids playing in the street, blue sky. It's complete and deliberate change from all the kind of concrete and
This is
modernism.
where real people live.
Well, this is kind of like the safe cocoon of the real world, isn't it? And you go to a doctor's surgery where there's a kind of like a pretty pregnant mother, and the doctor's like a slightly crusty but friendly old guy. And it's like, to then kind of upend that with the kind of unborn baby scanning Kim in that environment, you realise how strange and odd they are to the world. It's really, really nicely done.
Yeah, I really like that. And I like Revok turning up at the end of the scene as well. I thought that was a nice kind of reveal, like he's still tracking them. And
I guess if you're watching this the first time, you wouldn't necessarily realise that you were approaching the end of the movie, but you are suddenly in the last scene of the film, aren't you?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Revok has caught up with Vale.
Yeah.
So, I mean, let's get on to this idea that they're brothers, created by Dr. Ruth.
It doesn't sound crowbarred in. It doesn't necessarily sound like it was something that was tacked on.
So the idea is that Dr. Ruth has given his pregnant wife the ephemeral, and then discovered that the children were born with scanning abilities.
Well, I discovered that they were difficult at first and difficult to control, and the only thing that could placate them was ephemeral. I think it's later in life they would have discovered the scanning abilities.
And at what point, as brothers, would they have been separated?
I mean,
I just think because it's such a big, like, we're brothers and he's our father. It's one of those moments in the film which I can't swallow the logic of it.
It just works in that kind of clunky
soap opera.
Yeah,
reveal.
soap opera sort of way, but none of it really holds together if you look any closer. There's another line when this conversation gets a bit tense towards the end, and Revok starts becoming megalomaniacal. Vale says to him, "No, you're just like him. You're just like Ruth." And I was like, "Well, you've never seen Ruth behave that way. What are you talking about? It just doesn't. It doesn't work. You've never, Ruth has never been particularly.
He's never lost it. Basically.
He's never lost it, and he's never talked about world domination at all. So I don't think a lot of it works on that level.
Yeah, it's annoying that, isn't it? Because there's another pass on the film that with a little bit of tidying up on the narrative structure and some of the plot points.
That was not going to happen. This is just
I know,
shot.
I think that's the most frustrating thing. If you recast, rewrite, reshoot, there's a much better film to be had from this set.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of B movies, isn't it? That's the thing. Yeah. You get the sort of raw energy and the raw ideas there, but if you start to sort of poke and prod at them, then they do start to fall down a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're delaying getting to the actual meat of the scene, which is, I'm really surprised. I mean, obviously the exploding head is shorter and easier to show, but I'm really surprised this scanning duel isn't as famous.
Yeah.
Because it's hideous. It's really difficult to watch.
Yeah. It's really quite special there, I think. When you see the veins pop and so the brothers...
The brothers don't see eye to eye. Vale won't come aboard Revok's plan for world domination.
That's it, yeah.
Vale hits him with an objet d'art that's on his desk. And that obviously makes Revok very angry, and he decides
he cuts loose with his scanning powers, doesn't he?
Yeah. What I don't understand about his line, "I'm going to suck you dry. I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm going to suck you dry." What's he talking about? What's he going to do? Because he doesn't want any information from him, does he? He just wants him to join the cause.
Yeah, it's true actually. I mean, it's a cool line, but it doesn't make much sense.
Makes no sense. But they start a scanning fist fight where they're just throwing assaults at one another.
It's quite cool though, I think.
No,
you do buy into it. And
yeah, absolutely. And it's what I do like about it as well is it doesn't just feel like random shit, one thing after another. It does escalate.
Yeah.
And there is kind of a back and forth between it, which is properly scripted and acted and worked out beforehand.
Yeah. You're right about the escalation. Yeah, it feels like each cut moves us further along in this duel.
Yeah, and they're kind of like doubling up on what they've done to the other.
Yeah.
And
There's a definite push back and forth, isn't there?
yeah, and one of the things that, well, I hesitate to say like about it, but one of the things I think is so powerful about it, I mean, it's just for me, I find it really difficult to watch. There does come a point halfway through where it's clear that Vale isn't going to survive this. Even if he wins the duel, he physically cannot survive it. He's had his heart melted out.
Yeah, that's it. And we see him burst into flames. And...
Well, even before that, when his face has been so badly attacked that he's sort of peeling at chunks of his flesh, and he realizes that he's going to die, I find that extremely difficult to watch in anything.
Yeah, sure.
You know, when somebody's been so mutilated but they're still alive, you just can't put yourself in that mind space at all.
Yeah, it's horrific.
And this is why it's so kind of beautifully plotted and put together. It's like he realizes it at that point, and then that motivates him to his next thing, which is to kind of abandon his body and set it on fire, and then just launch himself at Revok.
Yeah, I didn't realise that he'd set himself on fire. I always read it as...
No, it's very much like a Zen thing. He kind of places his palms up, and then they come.
I thought that was a technical thing just to hide the gel, the fire gel.
No, that's literally, it's like a
Christ.
like a pose of sacrifice. He holds up his hands and they catch fire, and then the rest of him catches fire.
Oh, right, okay.
And then he just kind of relinquishes his body and kind of...
Is that when his eyes burst out?
Yeah, I think the suggestion is he's kind of launching himself through out of his skull and into Revok.
Oh, yeah. And so when Revok's eyes go white...
That's the point where he's
transference.
He's kind of fighting off Vale's attack.
So they're both inside their body now, fighting for supremacy.
Yeah. The fact that we can talk about what is effectively, we can talk about that much drama and narrative in what is effectively silent effect shots.
Yeah,
it's pretty
it's
amazing.
Really convincing. It's probably a good point just to have a little sidebar about Dick Smith, who was called in kind of last minute to sort of
another
on the visual effects.
Well, they'd shot it so quickly to get principal photography done, and they realised the scene didn't work, so they reshot it months later.
It's a very famous still taken of Cameron Vale's head exploding. That was the original ending, wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Ah.
So the shot of Michael Ironside that's on the poster of him, his body all tense and roaring, that's from the original ending.
Yeah, so this is another of Dick Smith's... he had about 3 emerging from retirement episodes, one after the other. He had like Altered States and this, and he also did effects for Ghost Story.
I think this was when he did this when Altered States was in shutdown.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it's phenomenal work, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really great.
I was really a bit disappointed, with the unforgiving sharpness of Blu-ray. You can sort of see a couple of the joins, which I'd never noticed before.
Yeah, okay.
But
you wouldn't see that on VHS.
No. Oh, you probably wouldn't see it on 35mm either, with the grain and noise and...
Stephen Lack takes credit for some of those effects because it kept bursting.
Yeah.
And so he said, just pinpricks at the end. It's a tube. Just put a pinprick at the end, and then all that stuff with the blood squirting across his face was from the pinpricks that he'd said, just to relieve the pressure in the pipes. And apparently he still has the other head from the exploding head scene.
Really?
He has that. Yeah, there's some really nice photos again, and a lovely interview with him, and he takes it to conventions and people pose with it and stuff. He said in the 70s people would put their knobs on it and stuff, and now people just give it a hug. So
I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about the sound design, which I only noticed how brilliant it was. I mean, obviously some of it sticks with you from first viewing, like the distorted fluttering voices and stuff, but the kind of bleed through from sound design into the music for a lot of these scenes is really, really great. Maybe I should just talk about the music. This is an early Howard Shore soundtrack, possibly his second or third for Cronenberg. I mean, the patterns there that he kind of used for all of his earlier Cronenberg soundtracks. The opening music is very, very similar to that of The Fly. You just get kind of like an opening declaration, and then it kind of flutters and wanders around. And his earlier scores have like a small orchestra, and then a lot of synthesizers. But this time round, I was really, really pleased with how well chosen and well used the synthesizer sounds were in this. then, a lot of times you just get somebody who'll just sit down with the synthesizer and like slightly tweak a preset and it'll just sound shit. But these all sound really, really effective. And there's stuff in it, there's subtle things that bring otherwise quite lifeless scenes to life. There's the whole thing in Consec with Keller interrogating Kim Obrist. That's got like an oscillating drone behind it that just holds the whole scene together.
Your best protection is to tell us everything we need to know. As soon as you do, Revik will cease to be a threat to anyone.
Not good enough. Revik's people are everywhere. And that scares me.
To be honest with you, Kim, the only one you should be afraid of is me.
But these kind of like the orchestra's going as well in this kind of duel scene with the main theme, but you've also got these like incredibly ferocious synth sounds, which just really, really suggest these focused psychic powers. And
it's supposed to sound like a headache, isn't it?
Yeah. Just watching again, I was just startled by how good the soundtrack was.
What about the other collaborators? Do we want to do a quick kind of whistle-stop tour of Mark Irvin, DOP?
Yeah.
The makeup guys, Stephen Duplay, or Stefan, I think they called him.
Stefan? Was he the guy who pulled out the shotgun to eventually pull off the exploding head?
It's a famous story there, but for anyone that doesn't know, I think they were quite frustrated trying to explode the head, and they had different types of rubberized and plastic and all sorts of different heads, and they just couldn't get it to work.
They couldn't use pyro because you'd see sparks, and it's not supposed to be that sort of thing.
And they were trying to inflate it at one point, but it just kept stretching like a balloon, didn't it? And I think he was so fucked off, he just cleared the set, brought out a shotgun and blasted it. And there's a nice sort of aside that Michael Ironside talks about where he says, is it realistic that I'm sat next to it but you can't see me? And they said, okay, yeah, good, yeah, let's get you in. He's like, okay, so what I'll need is like this much money, this, that. And they're like, oh, let's do it as a single. So that's why he's not.
It's quite odd. I only noticed this time round. Have you seen towards the end of that scene where they're clearing the auditorium, there's a high shot looking down on the table, and there's like no body and no blood and no anything. I'm like, Yeah, I'd like to talk about Mark Irwin because he's always in the shade, because Peter Suschitzky is obviously phenomenally good at everything he does, and I do think that his Cronenberg films are beautiful.
It's a nice collaboration of the technique and the sensibilities, I think, are nicely aligned.
But I do think, having seen this and looking back on Cronenberg's earlier movies, I do think Irwin was really onto something. I do think there are things in those early movies that you don't see again. They had a famous parting of the ways after The Fly.
No, I didn't know.
Well, because Cronenberg's obviously is very much loves to have his team around him, and after The Fly, everyone was lined up to do Dead Ringers, just about to shoot, and then it was put in turnaround. It was Dino De Laurentiis was funding it originally, and his production company just was about to fold. So it was put in turnaround for almost a year, and Mark Irwin went off and got another job doing the remake of The Blob. And then Cronenberg came back to him and said, look, we're ready to shoot now. He's like, well, I can't, I'm on another job. And I don't know if harsh words were exchanged, because Cronenberg still bears a grudge about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Mark Irwin's position always seems perfectly reasonable to me. It's like, I've taken another job, I can't just walk away from this other movie. And Cronenberg was very, very huffy, and that's why he went with Peter Suschitzky from that point onwards. But I do think that what Irwin does in the films, the way that he kind of captures particularly exteriors and things that would seem mundane, warehouse exteriors that are imbued with a strange sort of menace.
Yeah, he's got a good eye, hasn't he? Definitely.
I think he's a really, really good DOP, and he had a terrific career following on. He did lots of stuff with Wes Craven, and then started working with the Farrelly brothers.
That's right.
And
he definitely went into comedy, didn't he?
Yeah. So whilst, I think Peter Suschitzky is fantastic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put Mark Irwin's work down at all.
No, definitely not.
There's stuff on the Dead Zone and The Fly and this particularly.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is a lovely, rich-looking movie.
Yeah, it's great. The only other note I have is on Gary Zeller, one of the FX guys, and he's the creator of the Zell gel. Gary Zeller Zell gel.
Get it? Yeah.
Yeah. The fire gel that you can just set fire to, and you put it on your clothes, on your skin, and that's it. And I think this was the first time he'd used it.
It's a good showcase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Again, as I said at the beginning, and hopefully I feel we might have justified it over the course of the last hour and a bit. I do think it's frustrating that it's just like a minor entry in Cronenberg's filmography now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as polished, and his later work, I think, and maybe, I don't know, does he talk about it much?
Not at all, really.
Yeah,
No.
I think that's probably why.
Yeah, and I feel because it was a big hit at the time, and it did make a big kind of impact on horror cinema. It was definitely something that people talked about throughout the 80s.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'd imagine when
It was notorious when I was a kid. It was the film people would point at in the video shop.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Have you seen that? There was always somebody that lied about seeing it.
I think it was only overtaken by perhaps The Fly as the most talked about Cronenberg movie when some 5-6 years later, and that was kind of the new benchmark of mainstream Cronenberg, wasn't it? That was, I think that kind of eclipsed it. And it's despite having 2 or 3 shitty direct-to-video sequels.
So 4 sequels. You haven't seen any of those?
No.
I just skimmed through the posters. There's a beautiful poster for Scanner Cop 2: The Takeover. It's really, really visually striking.
Okay.
And then I watched the trailer and it was terrible.
And I just feel that it deserves a little bit more credit. It's not one of my favourite films. It's not my favourite Cronenberg by any stretch.
Sure.
But every time I see it, I'm there's something to enjoy in every scene.
Yeah, something that's exploring, cinematic curiosities. This is the kind of perfect movie to put on the menu. Would you pair it up with another, maybe with The Fly?
Absolutely, with The Fly.
Watch this and then The Fly, and you get the leap forwards, don't you?
Yeah.